Russia just quietly pulled its nuclear engineers out of Iran's only working reactor. Then, within days, made a formal offer to physically remove Iran's enriched uranium stockpile from the country. No announcement, no press conference, no explanation, just silence. And here's the thing, that silence is the most dangerous part of this entire story. Because when the country that built your nuclear plant, trained your engineers, and has been maintaining that facility for over a decade suddenly decides to pull its people out and offer to take your uranium with them, that is not diplomacy. That is not a negotiation tactic. That is an evacuation. And the question no one in mainstream media is asking directly is this: what did Russia's engineers see inside that plant that made them decide it was time to leave? In the last 72 hours, new intelligence assessments have begun circulating in Western defense circles. The IAEA has confirmed the presence of highly enriched uranium in an underground Iranian facility and simultaneously confirmed that their inspectors were denied access to the most critical sites. The Trump administration has stated publicly that Iran has restarted core elements of its nuclear program, and now Russian technical personnel have been withdrawing from Bushehr in what multiple regional intelligence sources are describing as a phased, deliberate pullout. This is not a coincidence. None of this is a coincidence. And by the time we get to the end of this, you are going to understand why this situation is potentially the most dangerous nuclear moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and why it is happening almost entirely out of public view. Let's start from the beginning, because to understand what's happening right now, you need to understand what Bushehr actually is, what Russia's role there really means, and why the relationship between Moscow and Tehran on this specific issue is unlike anything else in modern geopolitics. The Bushehr nuclear power plant sits on the southwestern coast of Iran, on the Persian Gulf. It is Iran's only operational civilian nuclear power station. Russia didn't just help build it. Russia built it entirely. The Soviets originally began construction in the 1970s. The project was abandoned after the Iranian Revolution. And then in the 1990s, Russia's state nuclear corporation, Rosatom, stepped in and completed it. Russia supplied the fuel. Russia trained the Iranian operators. Russia installed the systems. And under the original agreement, Russia was supposed to take the spent nuclear fuel back, which was a critical non-proliferation safeguard. The entire plant, in other words, was a Russian-managed operation dressed in Iranian clothing. Now think about what it means when the engineers who built and run that plant start leaving. Military analysts are already warning that this kind of technical withdrawal from an active nuclear facility is extraordinarily rare. You don't just pull your nuclear staff out of a reactor mid-operation for routine reasons. A nuclear power plant requires constant specialized human maintenance. The cooling systems, the fuel rods, the pressure controls, the safety monitoring, all of it depends on trained personnel being physically present. When Russia pulls those people out, one of two things is true. Either Moscow has decided the plant itself is no longer a priority, which makes no strategic sense, or Moscow has decided the plant is no longer safe to be near. And that second possibility is the one that should be keeping every defense analyst on Earth awake tonight, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is what happened immediately after the withdrawal became visible to outside observers. Russia made a formal proposal, quietly, through diplomatic channels, to physically remove Iran's enriched uranium stockpile and transfer it to Russian territory for safekeeping. That offer has been confirmed by multiple intelligence-adjacent sources, and here is why that offer is so deeply unsettling. It's not unsettling because Russia offered to take the uranium. It's unsettling because of what that offer implies. Russia already knows. Think about this carefully. If you are Russia and you have engineers inside Bushehr and those engineers are reporting back to Moscow, what would have to be true for Russia to decide that not only should they remove their people, but they should also try to get the actual nuclear material out of the country? What would they have to have seen or heard or assessed to believe that Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is now in danger of becoming uncontrolled? The answer, and this is where it gets serious, is that Russia likely assessed one or more of the following: that a military strike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure is not just possible, but imminent, that the risk of a catastrophic accident or deliberate sabotage inside the facility has risen beyond acceptable thresholds, or that Iran's own internal political situation has deteriorated to a point where the chain of command over its nuclear assets can no longer be trusted to remain stable. Any one of those three would be alarming on its own. The fact that Russia may be responding to all three simultaneously is something else entirely. Now let's talk about the IAEA confirmation, because this is the piece of this story that turns a geopolitical crisis into a potential global catastrophe. The International Atomic Energy Agency just days ago confirmed in official communications that their inspectors had identified the presence of highly enriched uranium in an underground Iranian facility. Highly enriched, not low enriched civilian reactor fuel. Highly enriched uranium is the material you use to build a weapon. The IAEA confirmed it exists, and then confirmed that Iranian authorities denied access to the sites where this material is being held. Full stop. Inspectors were blocked. This is a fundamental violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty framework. This is the exact scenario that the entire post-Cold War nuclear arms control architecture was designed to prevent and detect. And it is happening right now. Defense experts are now realizing that the combination of these elements creates what analysts privately refer to as a convergence event, a situation where multiple independent risk factors arrive simultaneously, each accelerating the others. Russia pulling its engineers from Bushehr is one signal. Russia offering to remove the uranium is a second signal. The IAEA confirming highly enriched material in underground facilities is a third. IAEA inspectors being denied access is a fourth. And the Trump administration making a public statement that Iran has restarted its nuclear program is a fifth. 5 independent signals, all pointing in the same direction, all arriving within the same narrow window of time. When you see convergence like this in intelligence analysis, you don't wait for a sixth signal, you act, or you prepare to act. And here's the thing about Bushehr specifically that most coverage is completely missing. Bushehr is not just a nuclear power plant in a general sense. It is a nuclear power plant in an active war zone. The broader Middle East conflict that has been escalating since late 2023 has not spared the Persian Gulf region. Iranian military infrastructure has already been struck. Israeli airstrikes have targeted Iranian assets. The United States maintains a significant naval presence in the Gulf, and Bushehr sits right on the coast of that Gulf in a country that is simultaneously under maximum geopolitical pressure, rearming, expanding its missile capabilities, and now appears to be operating nuclear material outside of international monitoring. Military analysts are already warning about what a single precision strike near the Bushehr facility could mean. Not necessarily a direct hit on the reactor itself. The containment structure is hardened, but the cooling systems, the external infrastructure, the power supply, the emergency backup systems, all of these are vulnerable. And a strike that disrupts cooling at an operational nuclear reactor does not produce a nuclear explosion, but it can produce something almost as catastrophic. It can produce a Fukushima-level radioactive release event in the middle of the Persian Gulf, the Gulf that supplies oil to the entire global economy, the Gulf that sits adjacent to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, tens of millions of people, critical global energy infrastructure, all of it within the potential contamination radius of a cooling failure at Bushehr. This is not a theoretical risk. This is a risk that Russian engineers who were physically inside that facility apparently judged to be serious enough to leave. Now, this is where the situation takes a serious turn, because the question is no longer just about what might happen. The question is about what Iran is doing with this situation, what options exist, and why every available option is worse than the one before it. Let's look at Iran's position first. Tehran is under enormous pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The nuclear deal, the JCPOA, is effectively dead. The Trump administration pulled out of it in the first term, attempted to reimpose maximum pressure sanctions, and has continued that posture. European diplomatic efforts to revive some form of nuclear agreement have gone nowhere. Iran's economy is under severe stress. Its regional proxy network, Hezbollah, Hamas, has been significantly degraded. The Houthi campaign in the Red Sea continues, but has not shifted the strategic balance in Iran's favor. And Iran's supreme leadership faces an internal legitimacy crisis that is deeper than most Western analysts acknowledge. In that context, nuclear capability is not just a strategic asset for Tehran. It is an existential insurance policy. It is the one card that, once fully played, guarantees that no external power can attempt regime change. This is the North Korea logic, and Iran's leadership has watched North Korea's experience very carefully. A nuclear-armed state may be sanctioned, isolated, and condemned, but it is not invaded. That lesson has not been lost on Tehran. And so when Russia offers to take Iran's uranium, from Iran's perspective, that offer is not a solution. That offer is a threat, because accepting that offer means giving up the one asset that makes Iran untouchable. Handing your nuclear material to another country, even a nominally friendly one, is strategic disarmament. And Iran has every reason to believe that once that material leaves Iranian territory, the political leverage shifts entirely. Intelligence reports suggest that Iran has not formally rejected the Russian offer, but it has not accepted it either. And every day that passes without acceptance, while Russian technical staff continue to thin out from Bushehr, is a day in which the worst-case scenarios become slightly more probable. But think about this. Russia's offer creates a paradox. If Iran accepts, it loses its most powerful deterrent. If Iran refuses, it loses Russian protection and technical support for its only working reactor. And if Iran does nothing, it operates a nuclear facility with diminishing qualified staff, increasing external threat, and international inspectors locked out. There is no good outcome in that set of choices. And that's exactly the kind of trapped position that leads to desperate decisions. Now let's talk about what the options actually look like from a broader strategic perspective. Because military analysts, intelligence officials, and defense experts are all running the same scenarios right now, and the results are uniformly grim. Option 1 is a negotiated settlement. Some form of emergency nuclear agreement in which Iran agrees to cap its enrichment, allow IAEA access, and hand over a portion of its stockpile in exchange for sanctions relief. This was the basic structure of the JCPOA. The problem is that the conditions that made the JCPOA possible in 2015 no longer exist. Iran has advanced its enrichment program significantly beyond 2015 levels. The Trump administration has zero political interest in a deal that could be characterized as capitulation. And Iran's supreme leader, who has watched multiple American administrations walk away from commitments, has fundamental trust problems that no written agreement can resolve. A negotiated settlement is theoretically possible, but the realistic probability of one materializing in the current window is close to zero. Option 2 is a military strike. Israel has been the most direct voice about its willingness to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. The Israeli Air Force has reportedly conducted extensive planning for exactly this scenario. The United States has the capability to conduct far larger and more effective strikes, including with the B-2 bomber and bunker buster munitions capable of penetrating deep underground facilities. This option is real. It is on the table. But here's where it falls apart. The IAEA has confirmed enriched uranium in underground facilities, but denied access to confirm exactly where all of it is. That matters enormously for strike planning. If you don't know where all the nuclear material is, you cannot guarantee that a strike destroys it. You might destroy some of it. You might disperse the rest. And dispersed nuclear material in a strike scenario is a containment nightmare. Add to this the Boucher complication. A strike anywhere near an operating reactor risks a radiological event with Gulf-wide consequences. Military planners know this. It is a serious constraint on what any strike package can actually accomplish. Option 3 is maximum pressure escalation, tightening sanctions, increasing naval presence, interdicting Iranian oil exports, cutting off financial channels. The problem with this option is that maximum pressure has been in effect for years already. The ratchet has been turned multiple times. And Iran is still here, still enriching, still blocking inspectors, still operating Bushehr. Pressure has costs. But Iran has demonstrated a willingness to absorb costs that Western analysts consistently underestimate. Option 4 is covert action, sabotage, cyber operations, targeted intelligence activities. This is the Stuxnet model, and there is reason to believe this option is already being exercised to some degree. But here's the reality. Covert action against a nuclear facility in a hot geopolitical environment carries its own catastrophic risk. A cyber attack that miscalculates the response time of safety systems in an operating reactor is not a hypothetical disaster. It is an engineering certainty waiting for the wrong moment. Option 5, and this is the one that intelligence reports suggest is most actively being considered by both Washington and Tel Aviv right now, is what analysts call a decapitation plus destruction package. Simultaneous strikes on nuclear infrastructure, command and control, leadership targets, and missile systems. An attempt to so thoroughly degrade Iran's military and political capacity in a single operation that it cannot effectively respond. This is not a strike. This is a war. And the downstream consequences of that war, Iranian retaliation, Strait of Hormuz closure, regional escalation, Russian and Chinese responses, global oil shock, cannot be modeled in any scenario where the outcome is clean. There is no good solution. And that's the truth that every government involved in this situation is privately aware of, even as each one continues to publicly signal confidence. Now let's bring Russia back into the center of this, because Russia's role here is more complex and more dangerous than almost any analysis is acknowledging. Russia has a formal civilian nuclear cooperation agreement with Iran. Russia built Bushehr. Russia supplies the fuel. Russia, in theory, has more leverage over Iran's nuclear program than any other external actor, including the United States. And Russia is using that leverage, but not in the way the West wants or expects. Russia is not using it to pressure Iran toward IAEA compliance. Russia is not using it to slow Iran's enrichment program. Russia is using it to position itself as the only actor capable of managing this crisis. By offering to take Iran's uranium, Russia is signaling to Washington, to Tel Aviv, to Brussels, to Beijing, I am the indispensable party here. You need me at this table. Whatever happens next, you cannot do this without Moscow. That is a geopolitical play of extraordinary sophistication. In the middle of its war in Ukraine, facing Western sanctions, economically isolated in many sectors, Russia has just inserted itself into the center of the most dangerous nuclear proliferation moment in 30 years. And it did so not through military force, not through threats, but through a nuclear cooperation relationship it built quietly over decades. Intelligence reports suggest that back-channel communications between Moscow and Washington on the Iran nuclear question have intensified significantly in recent weeks. Not publicized, not acknowledged, but happening. Because both sides understand that if this situation spirals without some managed off-ramp, the consequences extend well beyond the Middle East. And here's where we have to talk about what happens if it spirals anyway. A strike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, wherever it comes from, triggers a chain reaction that most mainstream analysis treats as isolated but is anything but. Iran's immediate military response options include closing the Strait of Hormuz, which handles roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply. It includes activating whatever remains of its proxy network for attacks on regional targets, including U.S. bases, Gulf state infrastructure, and Israeli cities. It includes unleashing whatever ballistic missile capability it has preserved against Israeli and potentially Saudi targets. And it includes, potentially, moving to accelerate whatever stage its nuclear weapons development program has actually reached, before that option is permanently foreclosed. Now add the Russian dimension. Russia has military assets and advisors throughout the region. Russia has defense cooperation agreements with Iran. A strike on Iran that kills Russian technical personnel, and Russian engineers have been at Bushehr, some may still be there, creates a direct Russia-West confrontation dynamic at exactly the moment when the Russia-Ukraine war is already straining that relationship to near breaking point. This is not a scenario where the risks stay contained in one geography. This is a scenario where one strike on a coastal nuclear plant in southwestern Iran can cascade into a simultaneous energy crisis, a regional war, and a direct confrontation between nuclear powers. Fast, uncontrollable, potentially inevitable if the current trajectory holds. Military analysts are already warning that the window for a negotiated resolution, if one ever existed, may be measured now, not in months, but in weeks. The IAEA access denial cannot persist indefinitely without triggering formal referral to the UN Security Council. A UN Security Council referral under current geopolitical conditions, with Russia holding a veto, goes nowhere diplomatically, but creates enormous domestic political pressure on the Trump administration to demonstrate strength. That pressure leads in one direction, and in Tehran, the calculation is equally narrow. Every day that passes without a decisive move from the West reinforces the bet that the deterrence logic is working, that the risk of striking an Iranian nuclear program of uncertain scope and location is constraining its adversaries. But every day also increases the probability that Israel, which operates under a different calculus than Washington, decides the risk of not acting is greater than the risk of acting. That's the trapped position. Everyone is waiting for someone else to blink. And in that kind of standoff, history tells us very clearly what happens. But here's the thing that brings us back to where we started, to the question that no one can fully answer, and that makes this entire situation uniquely terrifying. What did Russia's engineers see inside Bushehr? The information that flows from a nation's nuclear engineers back to their government's intelligence apparatus is not the kind of information that appears in press releases or diplomatic communiques. It is technical, specific, and deeply classified. Russia knows exactly what is happening inside that facility. The actual state of the reactor, the actual condition of the equipment, the actual scope of what Iran has been doing with its nuclear infrastructure. And based on what those engineers reported back, Russia made a decision to move its people out and made a public offer to physically remove the uranium. That is the data point. That is the real signal, not the diplomatic language, not the official denials, the behavior. Russia's behavior tells you everything you need to know about what Russia's engineers found inside that plant. Defense experts are now realizing that the combination of factors in play here, active war zone, operating nuclear reactor, depleted technical staff, blocked international inspections, highly enriched uranium confirmed but unverified in location, and a strategic environment in which every major actor is being pushed toward worst-case decisions, creates a scenario for which there is no historical precedent. Chernobyl happened at a reactor managed by a superpower with thousands of engineers and full government control. Fukushima happened in peacetime in one of the most technologically advanced nations on Earth. What we are potentially looking at here is neither. We are looking at a reactor in a country at war, with the country that built it pulling its people out, in a geopolitical environment where a strike near that reactor is considered not just possible, but actively planned. The scenarios do not need to be spelled out in full because once you understand the convergence, the withdrawal, the uranium offer, the IAEA blockage, the enrichment confirmation, the strike planning, the diplomatic paralysis, the conclusion writes itself. And that conclusion is not that nuclear war is certain. That would be too simple. The conclusion is something more uncomfortable than certainty. The conclusion is that we have entered a phase in which catastrophic outcomes are no longer being prevented by design. They are being prevented, if they are being prevented at all, by luck, by a strike planner deciding at the last minute not to authorize, by an Iranian commander choosing restraint, by a Russian engineer's final report not triggering the one decision that cannot be walked back. That is where we are. Not in a crisis managed by capable institutions with clear communication and aligned incentives. In a crisis managed by the absence of the wrong decision at the wrong moment. So where does this go from here? The next 30 to 60 days will determine whether this situation finds some kind of fragile, temporary off-ramp, or whether one of the pressure points we've discussed gives way. If IAEA access remains blocked, the UN Security Council process will begin. If Russian technical withdrawal from Bushehr continues, the plant's operational safety margin will degrade. If Israel determines that its window for effective military action is closing, the strike option becomes more probable with each passing week. And if Iran reads all of this as an imminent threat and decides that the only way to preserve its deterrence is to make its nuclear capability explicit and undeniable, the entire architecture of Middle East security, fragile as it already was, ceases to exist. Russia's uranium offer is still on the table. Iran has not answered. The IAEA inspectors are still locked out. The engineers are still leaving. And somewhere inside the Bushehr nuclear power plant, on the coast of the Persian Gulf, a reactor continues to operate in the middle of one of the most dangerous geopolitical convergences the world has seen in decades. So ask yourself this: if Russia, the country that built that reactor, that trained those engineers, that has had its people inside that facility for years, if Russia decided it was time to leave and time to take the uranium with them, what does Russia know that the rest of the world doesn't? What did they see inside that plant? And whatever it was, why isn't anyone talking about it? Because the silence around that question is the loudest thing happening in global security right now. And silence in a situation like this is never a good sign.